Good evening, and I guess good afternoon to everybody in California who's watching. We're here tonight with Kevin Osborne of Cellador Ales. How's it going, Kevin?
What's up, Marco? How's it going, man? Thanks for having me on.
See, again, I always get jealous of the backdrop of the person I'm talking to, versus me. I drive to my parents' house and I go into this room and there's like stuff here. And I don't know what it is, and it looks, there's like a shoebox and a paper shredder, and then meanwhile you're sitting in amongst oak barrels and things.
Something.
Are any of those guys full yet, or are we?
Just one right now. Actually, just filled it yesterday.
Oh,
it's bubbling.
What'd you fill it with? What type of barrel is it? What'd you fill it with?
The bourbon barrel. There's this liquor store around here called Flask, and they do some single bottling. They're bottling specifically for them of single barrels from distilleries. And they've gifted me a couple of the barrels that they got from that stuff. And so kind of doing a collaboration with them. And it's, the bourbon is Smooth Ambler. I'm not really familiar with, but it smells amazing. And I tried a little bit of the bourbon. It was really good. And I put in it a kind of dark mixed fermentation beer, hoping it'll be just like a little bit tart. And then might, in a couple months, transfer it over into a Pinot Noir barrel and age it on some foraged black currants.
Ah, really cool.
In LA. So we'll see how it comes along.
Really, really cool. So when when do you plan on being, kind of open, having all those other guys full?
Yeah, it's really tough to tell, man. Like if you look at blogs from brewers who've done this kind of stuff and blogged extensively about it, it's always like, yeah, this date, and then 6 months later, okay, this date and this date. Like everyone's always, a year behind schedule. My ideal time frame would be to start brewing by like May, and then our quickest turnaround beers would be like ideally around 3 months. So late summer maybe. We'll have a couple things out in the market. But we're not going to have a tasting room to start out. We're going to be production only in the beginning, partly because in Los Angeles, the conditional use permit application is ridiculous. It's like 10 months to get approved to do a tasting room. And if you try and do it at the same time as you're getting your licenses, like they'll probably lump them together, so you won't even be able to start brewing until CUP approved conditions permit. So we're waiting. We'll get it. We'll start the process for the CUP right after we get approved to start brewing.
Cool.
For aged beers, it just doesn't make sense to wait that long, I don't think.
So what drew you to do this kind of model where everything's going to be mixed fermentation, oak barrels? What kind of drew you into that? And then I want to get into kind of like your past in brewing a little bit. But it's such a unique model. I think it's partly. And I was talking to Bob Sylvester from St. Somewhere about this earlier today, actually. I think this might be the model of the future. Just how we see a bunch of wineries opening up in California in little warehouse districts, one right next to each other, and they buy their juice,
Yeah, exactly.
And then they're blending, and they're becoming, an artist through blending and through making sure the fermentation goes the way that they want it, because so much can be controlled through fermentation.
Yeah, I think it's a really great business model. And what we haven't seen much of, which I think will happen too, is kind of like a brewery co-op where a bunch of people get together a big space and go in on a brew house together, but they all have their own label and they share, like they each get a day on the brew house or something. I think that'll be a cool business model too. I can't think of anyone I know that does that. I don't know. I was working at a brewery called Golden Road, which recently got sold out to AB.
Right.
I think. I was working on the packaging line, and a lot of downtime, just like moving boxes of cans onto pallets and stuff like that. So I knew I wanted to open a brewery, just kind of thinking of what I thought the best business model would be. And kind of just slowly came upon the idea of doing all sours, and then realizing that, I might have heard of the Rare Barrel at that time and knew what their business model was. And so thinking of doing all barrels. So we're going 100% barrel fermented, so we don't have to buy stainless steel. But also I just like barrel fermented beers better than normal beers anyway. So that's a twofer right there. I don't know exactly. It wasn't like an aha moment. It was just like, over the last few years or something, kind of slowly working on a business plan and coming up with this idea, finding ways to do it as cheaply as possible because funding is not easy for me or for my wife. My wife is my partner, my business partner, just the two of us. Yeah, so I don't know. And I think it was just a love for the kind of beers that we're going to do. Like, really inspired by side projects and you know, Jester King, you know, like a funky, rustic, barreled, mixed culture beer.
That's what I love about it. I mean, and two of the things that set them apart is that they have their own kind of culture going. Jester King has a yeast culture, bacteria culture from the hill country there in Austin. Side project, the same thing, a Missouri yeast culture he's got going. Is that something you plan on doing too, where you're at?
Yeah, definitely. But I don't think it'll be like one culture. Definitely Jester King only has one culture that they use. I imagine Side Project but he has a few different things that he works around with. Right now, I've got like probably 3 main cultures, like blends of cultures that I've been keeping for between 1 and 2 years and cropping up and working with and really, really liking what's coming out of them. I'm trying to build up like a cachet of cultures that are unique and different, like maybe some stuff that's all Brett, some stuff that's Brett and Sack, some stuff that's Brett Sack Lacto, and then Brett Sack Pedio, and all cultures that have different profiles and stuff. So we're going to bottle dregs a lot and trying to get stuff from new labs like East Bay or Bootleg Biology. Those guys have some awesome stuff coming out. So yeah, building up cultures, trying to not use fresh pitches from labs as much as possible, trying to use stuff that I've been keeping for a long time and kind of has grown its own life inside of our brewery, and also is a little more durable than lab stuff. So yeah, working with all sorts of different things.
Yeah, it's cool because it allows you, you know, the Jester King yeast culture, for example, is such a monster that anything that culture touches, it tastes like that Jester King yeast culture.
Yeah.
And I've talked to a bunch of brewers that have collaborated with them, and it's like, they go, you know, we threw a lot more of our stuff in than they did, and all you taste is Jester King. So it's pretty funny how they've evolved this culture that's just like, that's our go-to for everything. But you're right, Corey over at Side Project is using, you know, different things for different beers, and it's nice to add multiple layers to portfolio. Not everything has to be sour. Some stuff can just be Brett.
Exactly. Because like, for instance, Red Barrel, they make awesome beers, and they use lots of different cultures actually, but it's not really varied. All their stuff kind of has a similar profile, like, and I'd rather be able to, for our brewery, put out stuff that tastes completely different from the next stuff. Like, not for every single beer, but for some stuff to have like really unique beers even within our own brewery.
Sure. So it sounds like it's just this kind of idea of barrel fermentation, 100% oak fermentation, and kind of came out of 2 things. One is this is the type of beers you like to drink, so it's the type of beer you want to make. And 2, you know, cost becomes something that's something that's everybody has to keep in mind. But it also takes you a lot longer to put these beers out too. I mean, you're going to be, like you said, 3-month turnaround versus 2-3 weeks.
Exactly. 3 months to a year, you know, 3 months.
Right. Even more sometimes.
Yeah, it's rough, and that's why I think you have to be so conscious of where your other costs are. You know, like if we can get away with not having a brew house, then that's a big chunk of money that we can save, and then also potentially we're helping out another local brewery to have a little bit better cash flow.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about this beer. Actually, I'm going to pour a little bit more of it in so people can see the color. I've been drinking on it, and I love it. You sent me a few beers, and this one is really interesting. I mean, we do a lot of Berliner Weisses down here in Miami. There are a lot of kettle soured. You just don't get the level of complexity as you're getting in this one. It's a Berliner with blueberries. Mm-hmm. I love the color on it. It's so cool. Maybe go into a little bit of the process behind producing this beer, and you know, what kind of sets this apart from something that is kettle sour for people who may be watching from Florida that are used to these floor devices versus this is not.
Yeah, let's do a little bit. So that particular Berliner is a no-boil Berliner, so it goes straight from mash to fermentation, kind of based off the stuff and inspired by what Michael Tonsmeyer is doing at the Mad Fermentationist. He wrote a couple of blogs about beers like this. I'll go on a tangent real quick. I just want to say that, like, well, one of my favorite things about sour brewers is that they break all the rules. You know, like the idea of not boiling a beer, that's just ridiculous, and we can go into that more later. But so it goes straight into fermentation, and it was a ale strain and a lactobacillus strain for primary, which was a pretty long primary by itself. Before the blueberries went on, I want to say it was like maybe 6 months. And then added blueberries, and with the blueberries added a bunch of our mixed culture. So Brett, Moore, Zach, whatever was in our mixed culture, we don't even know at this time. And then let it age on the blueberries for another 6 months, I think. So that's a year Berliner, and then bottle conditioning as well. So I think that's the main thing that sets it apart from your like newer kettle soured Berliners. And even a lot of people that do no boils, they let it sour and then they boil it after that, which is like essentially the same thing as a kettle sour. But this one wasn't like that. It was, once the primary fermentation was started, it never was boiled again or pasteurized in any way. So that's kind of the process for that one. The differences between kettle sours and this, I don't know. There's like lots of flavor differences. We were talking. We went on live that like there's a little bit more body. It's a little more funk that you get.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly what all the contributors are of those differences, but you definitely can tell the difference between something that's been kettle soured and something that's been yeast or bacteria soured.
Yeah, and the finish to me really stands out as something different. And I think it's that active kind of bacteria that's still going and going. This is the beer you can sit in a bottle for a while and it's going to evolve. But for something to me that it's like a cleaner sour finish than a kettle sour beer, if that makes any sense.
For sure. Well, I think that like most people that are doing kettle sours are using the lactobacillus that was just naturally occurring on the grain. And with that, you really have no idea what you're getting. And on top of that, you're getting yeast, whatever other yeast and bad bacteria that were on those grains, fermenting at their ideal temperatures for however long you're kettle souring, you know. And then you have to try and clean that stuff up later or take precautions to make sure you're not getting lots of bad bacteria. But if you're going to do a normal, like what we did for this beer, you can pitch cultures that you're aware of and that you know how they're going to work and that they're going to make good flavors.
So I just hosted an interview series at Green Bench, and we talked a lot about, we talked with Jesse from Almanac and Corey from Side Project and some of the guys we mentioned earlier. So Brandon Jones from Embrace the Funk over at Yazoo.
Okay.
And a lot of the questions that came out of the audience were, how do you feel about kettle sour? Is there, I mean, yeah, the flavor profiles differently. Are you one of these guys that feels passionately about it one way or the other, or it's just kind
I mean, I don't necessarily like hate kettle sours or people that do it, you know, like it's not anything that I want to do in my brewery, not what I'm interested in. I think the only thing that kind of is a point of contention with me is with people that try and make the price point of a kettle sour the same as a normal sour,
right?
Because they know people buy it. Like if a beer only took you 3 weeks, 4 weeks to make, like you shouldn't be charging the same as a beer that took you 6 months or a year to make, in my opinion. I think the beer should be accessible.
There's some merit to that. I mean, a lot of the expense that goes into these beers is time, you know, time. A year sitting in a fermentation vessel that can't be used for anything else during that year, really can put a damper on, you know, just the economics of a brewery, moving product in and out of the brewery.
Exactly. And you need lots of extra space, which is not cheap, especially in major cities where you and I are.
Yeah, exactly. So I see you got the stacks behind you, and I see that over your left shoulder, there's more racks ready to go.
Yeah.
How many barrels do you plan on starting with?
I figured that for the first 3 months, we'd be filling about 100 barrels. And so I'm trying to source as many of those 100 as I can right now. We have 25 wine barrels right now and 1 bourbon barrel. And actually, just like an hour before this conversation, I bought 22 puncheons, wine puncheons.
Nice.
So kind of slowly building that up. It's kind of like catch-22 because you want to get them as fresh as possible, but you also want to make sure that you have barrels to fill when you're ready to brew in it. So kind of debating still whether I want to put a holding solution in them right now until we can brew in them. They're really good barrels that I have, at least so far, and there's no visible damage or area between the staves where I think there'd be leaks. And so I kind of want that wine character out of it in my beer, you know. I don't want to suck it all out with a holding solution.
Sure. So let's backtrack a little bit. Golden Road, you were on the packaging line. Did you do any brewing at Golden Road? Did you do any brewing at any other breweries before this, or has it been a lot of? I guess I want to get into where you're. I mean, so the beers that I have tried have been really, really great. I mean, a lot going on. I had the other night a tart saison dry hopped with, I think it was a El Dorado. What else was in there? Was it Galaxy or Mosaic? I think.
I think it was probably El Dorado and Mosaic.
Okay, and it was just awesome. I remember cracking it open and smelling it. Just wow, that's really, really nice. The body and the mouthfeel is just really nice in the beer too. And there's a lot going on. You know, it was tart, slightly sour, but it was just so juicy. I really, really enjoyed it. It was almost as if you had like poured like tropical fruit juice in it too. It was really nice, man.
Sure. So I'll talk about that beer a little bit. I do. That's like my favorite style to do is a funky saison with like a little bit of tartness, and dry hop sours are also one of my favorite things. So I usually do like a light dry hopping as well. I don't know. I call them saisons, but I don't really know if they fit into that category. We have to put words on things so that people know what it is. So that's what I decided to call it. But those beers that I make are Pilsner based with, they're kind of based off of they're inspired by what the Rare Barrel is doing with adding spelts and oats to build up the mouthfeel a little bit.
Right.
Usually I add a little bit of one extra specialty malt, like some Vienna or some Munich or something like that, to help with the graininess aroma and the mouthfeel as well. And then they're also mashed pretty low, like in the mid 140s, because for that kind of beer, I want it to get dry as quickly as possible.
Right.
Because I want to, when we make them for our brewery, I want to release them within 3 months or something. And if you have a bunch of extra hard to ferment sugars in there, you have the possibility of bottle bombs, you know. And so I don't think that it helps at all, for the most part, to have those kind of sugars in there for that style of beer. So it's a relatively quick fermentation for what it is. It's like 2 months in the primary, and then like a week or two of dry hopping, and then bottle conditioning, and primary fermented with one of my mixed cultures. So for most of my beers, I don't add any fresh yeast from labs. It's all just the mixed culture. And this particular mixed culture that I use for most of my stuff, it started out as dregs of Saison de Ponce, something from Cricket Stave, which I don't remember, and Jester King. So just those three. And whatever that's turned into now after almost 2 years, I think it's a pretty magical combination.
Yeah, there's some stalwarts there at DuPont strain and the King strain, and then Cricket Stave. There could be a million things in there too. I mean, who knows?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because they started out doing all Brett, but he, like on the sour hour, he said most of their stuff is mixed culture now. Whatever's in the rules. So yeah, there's all sorts of stuff in there.
It becomes easier, I think, when you're doing what you're doing with a bunch of oak. Some are mixed fermentation, some are mixed culture, some are not. It all ends up getting like blurred after a while. It's like, well, screw it. It's kind of like what Jester King did. They started off with some beers that were just Saccharomyces, and then they were just like, you know what? Our culture is for everything, and it works really well for them.
Yeah.
Becomes difficult to kind of keep them separate, especially when you're dealing with oak, where the oak actually holds the culture in it.
Yeah, exactly.
So everything I've had I've liked. I guess going back to the original question was, and I just poured myself. I think this is a tart saison with oranges.
Cool.
And it's awesome. And I guess I'll show it for the camera. It's a really pretty looking beer. The aroma is phenomenal. I mean, it's just I keep finding myself going back and back. It's like really fresh, fresh orange, the sweet orange, not necessarily so much of a tart orange. I think the tartness is coming from whatever's fermenting the beer, not necessarily the orange itself.
Yeah.
So there's obviously a lot of thought and experience going into these beers. So where did you start brewing and when?
Yeah, so I've only been home brewing for about 3.5 years. And pretty early on, I was set on trying to open my own project. And I knew if I wanted to do that I'd only feel comfortable if I had at least a little bit of experience at working at breweries. And so doing some applications, try to do a couple things. I had an interview at the brewery for packaging, which didn't work out. And then eventually a mutual friend helped me get a job at Golden Road. And he's like one of their head brewers now, one of the 2 head brewers. And I was there for probably 6 months, and all I did there was packaging while I was there. It was actually only part-time because I can't live on minimum wage. And so I had to keep my other job as well. So I did that for a while, and then decided to apply to some other places after that, see if I could do something other than packaging, and ended up getting like it was kind of an internship type thing at Stone. They were calling it brewery worker, and basically they have brewers, cellarmen, and centrifuge operators that work for them, and this position was kind of an assistant to all those people. So I got some really cool experience down at Stone, learned a ton of stuff. They have a really thorough program for training people down there. It's like,
yeah, I hear they have good brewers at Stone.
Yeah, it's like a full week of just classroom training, and then full week of just doing everything that they do there. You know? So that was a really cool experience. And then after that, I left Stone, I think around November of 2014. And start from there, just started full-time planning my own projects, working on a business plan, looking for funding, looking for a space, which ended up taking 6 months. So yeah, that's all my experience. So I don't think that any of the experience for my beers and the recipes came from working at breweries. It was all just doing research and talking to other brewers, watching your interviews and going on the Brewing Network and doing their stuff. So yeah, mostly just kind of like self-taught book and online learning.
Yeah, you know, the internet is an amazing resource, and I feel like an old man saying something like that, but it is. I mean, it's like, you know, for example, Michael Tonsmar, you mentioned earlier, is so easily accessible for questions. He's such a wealth of knowledge that, you know, I email him to ask him questions. Hey, this happened in my brew day. What do you think? Is there anything I can do to correct it, et cetera, et cetera?
Yes.
He's just an awesome resource. He answers a lot of people's emails. And then the other thing is that the forums, you've got guys like, you know, that want to start brewing Northeast style IPAs, and then you've got the, you know, the owner of Trillium Brewer answering questions on forums. So it's such a cool industry where people at home can get a ton of experience. Maybe not on the, you know, production schedule or necessarily the numbers that go into running a brewery, but certainly the brewing aspect is wide open thanks to things like forums and YouTube and then the accessibility of the beer community itself to people like you and I that brew at home, and now you going in professional.
Yeah, exactly. I think that even if I was trying to do this 5 years ago, I don't think that I could have done it as well as I have the ability to do it now, because the way that the sour beer community has put information out there and really like helped others as much as they can. Like there's so much information out there with Milk the Funk and with podcasts and just talking to other people that like it just makes it that much easier.
You know, the other cool thing is like people like yourself. Like I said, I think this may be the kind of early frontier days of sour beer in America. And there's going to be people like yourself opening up these real regional, you know, small-ish production breweries. Most of it eventually, probably with you too, will end up in a tap room. You're going to have to come to the brewery to get it. And it's going to be a lot of this kind of early, you're kind of like in the early stages of this kind of model. And I think it's going to open up the world to neighborhood and regional sour beer production. It is, you know, it's tough to get a hold of a lot of times too. A lot of breweries aren't willing to get into it. They're kind of scared of it. And so, you know, it's good to have people like yourself stepping out and saying, well, this is going to be, you're going to come here and you're going to get it all day long. I mean,
it's cool. I mean, there's a couple of things I think are awesome. Like one, the beer community, especially with sour and funky beer, willing to pay a little bit more. It allows brewers to stay a little smaller and focus a little bit more on quality and doing really cool experiments and stuff. And it's cool that a tiny brewer, because like side project, like what Corey's doing over there, he's a small, really small production.
Put out 200 barrels last year.
Yeah, but he's a national brand.
Yeah, but it's incredible. That's nothing. It's
amazing.
Nothing in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
200 barrels is nothing. And I asked him about this. The entire country knows about his beers, and I would say internationally they know about his beers. In Europe, huge. And he's put out 200 barrels of beer. So you're definitely hit the nail on the head with that assertion. I mean, it's crazy, these kinds of beers, how people are willing to attach to a more expensive product, a much harder to find product. You know, so it's cool. Do you see it that way? Do you see yourself in kind of one of the up and coming on the front line of this industry? I mean, the sour beer production in America is super young. I mean, we're in the beginning stages, in my opinion.
I think so too. I don't know. I never really thought about it in that way. I think that there's a lot of people who've like trailblazed like a really cool path already. Like we mentioned, I think for me the biggest ones are like Jester King and Casey and Crooked Stave and those guys.
Russian River and Rare Barrel up in your state.
So I don't know. I mean, hopefully we contribute something, but I think a lot of the work is already been. The hardest part of the work has been done by those guys.
Yeah, but even still thinking about it, right? I mean, it's a tricky business model to go into too, because you know the IPA is still the king, right? I mean, IPA is still
yeah.
And then beyond that, I think people love their stouts, right? I mean, they love their big, thick stouts. So what I'm saying is, yeah, there's people putting in the time to kind of make these beers more acceptable, but they're still not on where they need to be. You know, I still think that, you know, there's like a really hardcore fan base of these beers. Some people starting to get into it a little bit that are kind of curious as to why do people keep talking about sour beers. So I feel like the world is wide open for people like you to do whatever the hell it comes to mind to really push the boundaries. And it's got to feel kind of good that you can just have no rules, just go. I mean,
it's fun. And that's like when people ask like, what are the kind of beers you're making? What are your core beers? So I was like, whatever I want to do the day we're brewing, right? It's like, that's one of the coolest things about it. We can do whatever we want. I think that all we have to focus on, people in the stage like me, is keeping quality high. And it'll do exactly what you said. It'll just blow up. I hope that something like what happened to IPAs happens to sour beers. So like back in the day, IPA was all about like 100 IBUs, like how much bitterness can you get into it? Like people are buying IPAs just because it said IPA. But nowadays it seems to be that bitterness is a little lower, it's a little balanced. It's mostly about dry hopping and late additions and flavor and dryness.
Yeah, thank God.
I think that's a really good thing.
It's starting to get to a point where people were just making these like huge malt beers to be able to hold the backbone of 8 million IBUs, which you can't even your palate can't even perceive it correctly, anyways.
And even more so, I love the trend of session IPAs and like hoppy pales. Like, I think that's the coolest style. I almost never drink IPAs or double IPAs now because the flavors that you get and like the drinkability of a session IPA is just so much higher.
Yeah, I agree with you. So you mentioned the brewery a little while ago, and you've got a beer that you collaborated on with the brewery, or
kind of, yeah. It's I won their homebrew competition last year when I was still a homebrewer. I'm technically still a homebrewer, I guess, until I get my approvals. So yeah, I won their competition. It was a talk about session IPAs. Basically, the recipe was a session IPA, which I fermented 100% with a blend of Brettanomyces. And apparently they liked it. I heard a story that Patrick Rue, the owner, wanted to go as the winner with this goose that someone had submitted. And Evan Price from Noble talked him out of it because it's been really difficult to make. And so thanks, Evan, for that. Yeah.
It's on the market, though. I mean, it's bottled and on the market.
It's on the market, yeah. We brewed it on Black Tuesday. If you're familiar with the brewery, they do like a big Black Tuesday release every year. So on Black Tuesday was the first brew day. They did 3 full days of brewing with it and did talk about 200 barrels. They did 180 barrels of just that beer. So
wow.
all Corey King's yearly production. And it came out like a month or so ago. And yeah, it's awesome. I'm stoked.
Do you recommend, it's 100% Brett fermented. Do you recommend people drink it fresh? Or
yeah,
I always say, get a few bottles and drink one fresh and see what happens to it.
Yeah, exactly. I think it'll be best fresh. I haven't tried, I probably will this week try theirs against my homebrew to see like kind of how it aged and which I think is better fresh or aged, but I would definitely say fresh. It's a heavily dry hopped beer, and so that's the point of the beer is the hops and the way it plays with the Brett. And because of the Brett, the hops will last a lot longer, I think, but still you want to drink it fresh.
You know, I keep pouring myself this beer. I freaking love it. The concept of a Brett fermented hoppy pale ale IPA, I love. I mean, I think the Brett really plays with the tropical fruit, especially if you use tropical fruit hops. I think the fruitiness and the Brett brings out this real juicy character of the hops. A buddy of mine down here is opening Odd Breed Wild Ales, and he does a phenomenal double IPA, 100% Brett double IPA.
Nice.
It brings out like the body's or the mouth feels different than a standard double IPA, for example. And Brett, I feel like it adds so many more layers and does so much with hops. And I love that people are starting to think outside of the box and actually mixing the two together. I know Creature Comforts does one as well. I think it's such a cool idea. I hope that, you know, especially for the sake of brewers like yourself, that's one of the next big. So we're going to bring people into Brett through these Brett IPAs, Brett Pale Ales, and people are going to see, oh, what is Brett? That's a really cool new experience with an IPA.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. And actually, that's a Michael Tonsmeyer thing, too. I think I got that idea from him as well. That was one of his original recipes for Modern Times, I think, was a 100% hoppy thing. I think it's a super cool style that people will start to dial in and get really good at. Yeah, definitely.
Do you plan on brewing things like that at your brewery? I mean, are we going to be? I'd imagine it's.
Yeah, it'll be mostly stuff that's mixed culture that has bacteria in it as well, but we will do some 100% Brett stuff as well, I think.
Cool. Do you find there's certain hops for people out there that maybe want to brew a Brett Pale Ale? Do you find that there's certain hops that lend themselves better to Brett versus others? I mean, I think.
No, I haven't done enough experimenting with it. I use my favorite hops, which are like the juicy American styles, like El Dorado or Mosaic or something like that. But I did a beer. I actually have it in front of me, so let me look at what the hops were. Did a beer with Fuggle and Pearl hops, which was a dry hopped like Saison, and that actually has been one of my favorite ones I've done. So I think that you can't. Brett's gonna change the hops in such a way that you have no idea what's gonna come out of it. So I think every hop is worth giving a try for dry hopping in that kind of beer.
One question I had, you mentioned earlier that you ferment, or you mash a lot of the mash temperature of a lot of your beers in the mid-40s, mid-140s, excuse me.
Yeah, like 145 to 150.
It's been a long day. I can't get like I can't get like my words out. So that I mean, do you compensate that low mash temp with, like you said, like the oat and spelt? Is that the way you kind of get around making the beer too dry? Because I feel like a lot of beers nowadays, and yours do not suffer from this at all, but I've been sent some beers from people
they're thin, right?
on the homebrew level that end up tasting really watery. You know, because I think they're not putting in these grains that are going to give you a better mouthfeel or heavier body.
I'm really passionate about. I think that I don't like sweetness in beer like at all. Like the drier, the better to me. So, and that's something that I think I learned from probably Chester King, because they do the same thing. So I always strive to get as close to like 1.000 gravity or 0 Plato as much as possible. And all the beers that you've tried from me, and most of the beers I've done, are kind of in that range. I think that the idea that sweetness is mouthfeel is kind of misleading and a misconception in people's minds. And there's other ways to work in mouthfeel. So one thing that Chad Jacobson said in an interview that you can find, I think, on the Brewing Network, is this idea that Brettanomyces doesn't create glycerol, I believe it is, which leads to the perception of mouthfeel in a lot of beers. So you have to work back in that mouthfeel in different ways, and that's the use of the spelts or the rye or the extra wheat or the oats, especially. It can really give you that mouthfeel. So I feel like some of my beers have, like, because I use a lot of that stuff sometimes, have like a really, really huge mouthfeel, but they're actually really dry beers. And I think that also is a huge flaw in a lot of sour beers. They're really thin, like they taste like water, like you said. Like, they need something else.
The other thing, and I feel like I'm just keep kissing your ass here, but the other thing I really like about your beers, so beyond the mouthfeel and the body, it's a really nice silky mouthfeel in a lot of these beers, and it's nice. And I haven't gotten the perception of water at all, or watery at all.
Yeah, I'm trying to avoid that, so thanks.
The other thing I really like is the aroma of the beers. They're really, really aromatic beers.
Sure.
What can people do to get that? I mean, this is, again, I mean, it's super, super, super fruity. I mean, it's
that's a really good question, and I'm really glad that my beers do that, and I'm not 100% sure what it is. I think that probably a lot of it is the way different cultures of sac and Brett and bacteria play off against each other. And so I like in my beers to add as many strains as possible. And so the more opportunity you have for those things to play off each other, the better. And I think that as far as the fruity notes go, I think you get that from having Brett in the primary and also lactobacillus in the primary. When you add Brett later on, to me, it tends to mostly have those kind of like more horsey, funky aromas, which are cool sometimes too. But if you prefer the fruity stuff, definitely you want like lots of Brett, but also sac, I think, in the primary, because if you have a strain, like a good Saison strain that's going to create lots of phenolics and stuff like that, Brett's going to eat away all that stuff, and it's going to turn it into awesome fruitiness. And so I think that's part of it. I think also part of it is dry hopping, light dry hopping, just like a little bit of dry hopping. The Brett eats that stuff up, and it creates cool stuff. But yeah, it's something I've been really proud of my beers with is the aroma. I'm not super sure exactly what I do to make that happen.
Fair. Here's something else. I just got an email. Somebody said, ask him about the way he treats his water for sour beer.
Yeah.
So there's different schools of thought on this too. You know, I was chatting with, again, Gesture King keeps coming up. This is like Gesture King, you know,
They're my
Yeah.
favorite.
Yeah, this is like a sub Jester King interview.
We love Jester King.
Yeah. So I was having a chat with Jeff about treating water and water temps when you're fermenting and conditioning and all this stuff. And he's such like a he tells me, he's like, I'm just a glorified home brewer, dude. I love the fact that I do Texas water. That's what I do. I'm not really treating it. It's my Texas Hill Country water. It adds what it adds to my beer. Why wouldn't you do the same thing with your Miami water? So I'm like, well, my pH is at 9 something. And so then I want to bring that down a little bit. He's like, why? Maybe, but why?
Yeah,
and so
really yeah. For sure, it's a good question. And to keep it on Jester King, I know that they naturally have really bad pH because they use well water, and that they've kind of been trying to fix it, but that they're going to go back to just letting it be what it is, because you get less efficiency in your grains, but you can just add a little bit more grain and then fix your efficiency, and you get probably a lot more flavors. Because I like a minerally character in like a funky sour beer. I like that kind of like
Sauvignon Blanc.
Sauvignon Blanc character, exactly. So as far as what I do, absolutely nothing. I do the carbon filter, and then that is what it is. I don't really look at what it is. I don't have it tested. I don't add anything to process the water. I like kind of what Jester King says, like we use what we have in our area. Not that LA is anything special as far as water, but you use what you have, and that's it. Like I remember on the Sour Hour, what's his face from Sante Darius was saying almost the exact same thing. He's like, we have the worst water in the world. I remember him specifically saying, I wouldn't let you drink it, but go use it to prove, because that's what we have. And then and so far, I like what I've been making, so I don't mess with it.
Yeah, there's something to be said for that too. I mean, it's different. An IPA brewer is going to drop their pH maybe for the hop efficiency. The hops interact differently with different pH. The yeast will interact differently with the hops at different pH, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it seems to be that sour beer producers are just kind of like, you know what? Part of what makes us special, part of what makes us regional, part of what makes us different from the other sour producer is our water is different from each other.
For sure, yeah, definitely. Yeah, if we all were using the exact same water, trying to recreate the same thing, we lose a lot of the complexity that you have between brewers.
How close are you to wine country over there? Are you sourcing barrels like at the wineries? Are you going out there? Is that
I'm not so far. I'd love to. We're not really close to any wine country, but we're like a driving distance almost in every direction from wine country. So I would love to try and create relationships with wineries. So far, I've been using one barrel dealer that I like. Like it's really awesome, high quality, fresh barrels. And that's just easy for me because I have lots of other stuff to do, plus another full-time job.
Right.
Something I do want to focus on in the future.
Is what I'm sorry to come in.
No, sourcing directly from wineries is something I want to work on.
One of the other questions I had also that just came in was, what types of temperatures are you guys fermenting at? Especially for bread, are you fermenting it warmer? So, and again, I guess that's a good question too, because talking with Evan Watson up at Plan B Brewing, he's like, "Oh, Miami, that must be great to ferment these beers quick." And some people go, "Don't ferment them high, no matter what." Do you have any thoughts on temperature? Do you do anything that control your temperature?
Something I think about a lot, and there's lots of contradictory information from sour brewers on this topic. Who was I listening to or saw an interview with the other day? I think it was on your website. It was an interview with somebody saying that they've always fermented really warm, like in the 80s.
Yeah, that was Evan.
Pretty
sure it was Evan.
Yeah. And then you see other brewers that say, like, we want to keep our cellars as cold as possible. Like we want it in like the low 60s, like, Russian rivers like that. And so, like, what's good for it and what's not? I usually pitch around 75, like definitely somewhere in the 70s, mid to low 70s, and let it rise as much as it's going to over fermentation, and then it ages at room temperature. Where I've been doing it, which is but most of the stuff has been so far. In my house, we have like a walk-in closet that we converted into like an office slash like brewery cellar, and it's like in the middle of our building, and it stays relatively the same temperature, which is awesome. When I was like 6 to 8 months ago, when I was looking for spaces for this project, something I worried about a lot, and trying to calculate the costs of having full HVAC in a warehouse. And luckily, I think the space we ended up finding came with HVAC, which is cool, so we can cool it if we want to. But the more I think about it and the more I experiment with it, kind of the mind that like, as long as it doesn't get like over mid 80s, I'm not too worried about it. And you let it do what it does, and then you have a little bit of seasonality in your beers, and you can have different flavors to blend with and play around with. So
I love it. I love it. It's a cool thing. It's, again, with these style of beers, you're so open to interpretation. I mean, that's one thing that a lot of brewers talk about. It's like, what are my guidelines at a competition? I mean, nobody can define a specific guideline. People call them farmhouse ales because it's just easy to say, oh, these are farmhouse ales.
Yeah, exactly. Recipe, I make it from scratch usually. It's like, what do I think? What ingredients going into this would make the beer that I think would be good, and that would make the beer that I kind of am envisioning in my mind? And it's not like going for a style at all. It's like, or on the reverse side of that, you start with a style, and like, how do you mix this? How do you change it to be something else? So yeah, I think styles are antiquated, and they have their purpose for certain brewers or for learning things, but I don't know. I don't think about it at all. I mean, it's kind of tough because you still have to name your beers something. You have to convey to people what it's going to taste like.
Right.
So
and that's the difficulty, right? And that's something Michael Tonsmeyer talks about too. You can call it farmhouse ale, but it doesn't really tell people what it is.
Yeah.
So that's a difficulty. That's a marketing thing, though. It's not a brewing thing. And I like the fact that these styles are just so open to what do I want to create? What kind of sensory perception do I want to create?
Yeah.
And that's the only guidelines that you're bound by. And that's a cool kind of freedom that a lot of brewers, like Firestone Walker, doesn't have that. Maybe Barrel Works does, but Firestone Walker doesn't have that. Or Spirit of Honor does not have that. They don't have that liberty, Because
it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, even clean brewers, they can make their own styles. They can blur the lines and do whatever they want, but it's really not that common of a thing. I think it's mostly reserved for sour and funky brewers.
Amen to that. So what kinds of things can we expect from you? We've talked about a couple of the beers, or 3 of the beers, actually 4 of the beers today, if you include the brewery beer. What kinds of things can we expect from you? What are you excited about being able to put out?
I'm excited about fruited stuff. I'm excited about things that are balanced, so I don't think you'll see something that's like extremely sour for us, or something that's extremely bitter, or something that's 20% in alcohol. I mean, balance is kind of my favorite thing, and I kind of want to just experiment and play around and do whatever we feel like. I imagine that there'll be a pretty wide variety of stuff that we put out, but then also I can imagine that there won't be. I can imagine that there'll be like a couple saisons and something that's a little more sour and something that's a little bit darker, but all kind of like in the same like medium range sourness and some funk, and I don't know. We'll see. You have to wait and see, I think.
So I was going to ask you about, like, you kind of hit on it. Is there any beers that you've brewed consistently that you think this is something I want to have on year round? Is this something that is there any of those kinds of beers?
No, for the most part, when I brew at home, I brew something different every time, or at least I tweak it enough to be different. That's what excites me about brewing is creating something, and the idea of brewing the same beer every week. I knew I'd lose interest quickly if that's what we were doing. So maybe I really like the idea of having something like really light and really easy drinking and really affordable that we can put out like kind of on like a year-round type situation. But I think we'll grow into that. We're not going to start with that.
Cool. So from the beginning, it's going to be you're going to get lucky enough to try this or not. It's going to be what it's going to be a revolving thing. Are people gonna be able to? I mean, is the plan originally to distribute it to like restaurants and bottle shops type of thing?
Yeah, especially because we don't have a tasting room. I'd really love to find out a way to do online sales. I don't know how common it is out by you, but like in LA and Southern California, it's a really common thing to do like your own website or brown paper tickets or something. I like the idea of being able to buy something without having to be there in person.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd really love a way to find out how to do that without having our own place where people can pick it up. But then also definitely it'll be around LA, mostly just LA. We'll be self-distributing. So we're going to be focusing on bottles. I wouldn't expect to see a lot of kegs around from us. And mostly focusing on liquor stores. But then I also really want to work on taking away the stigma between craft beer and like fine dining. Because I'm a major foodie and I love to find the newest, best restaurant in LA, and I want to focus on getting some of our beers into restaurants like that. And not to make it pretentious, but just so that you can enjoy the products we're making and other products like it paired with the best possible food there is.
Yeah, I agree with you 110% on that. I wrote an article about that. Actually, Jester King.
Yeah, they do a really good job with that. They do lots of food stuff.
He contributed to the article, and so did again Corey from Side Project contributed to the article. It's an important thing, I think, because people only see. So when you have a higher price tag on a beer, people kind of think to themselves, immediately someone is willing to pay $50 for a bottle of wine and not think twice about it. Mm-hmm. A beer that's sat in a barrel for a year and a half, 2 years, people looking at $20. What the hell are you talking about? And so it's like, well, why wouldn't you pay $20 without not blinking? I mean, what's
thought about, but what just came up to me is like, when you buy wine, it's like you're buying red wine or you're buying white wine, and you pretty much know what it's going to taste like, right? Like, and you can assume that, for the most part, you can assume the more you're paying for it, the better it's going to be, right? With beer, you really, if you don't know who the brewer is, you never had the beer before, you have no idea what you're getting. And so you have to take a major risk on assuming that it's going to be something that you like. And so there are a lot of differences. Even though it's long aged like wine, you don't have the hurdle of the grapes and the land for buying the grapes and stuff like that. So I see the differences, and I honestly don't want beer to be in the space where you're paying $100 for the best stuff. I'd like to keep it as affordable as possible. But I do think that there is still a room to grow in price, and there's still a lot of culture.
100%. I mean, you're not owning a side of a mountain and tending to it and paying people to make sure that your grains grow a certain way and your hops grow a certain way, and so there is a difference definitely in the production of the ingredients, where it becomes more expensive for these wineries to produce these things, so they're doing it themselves and they're doing it very, everyone's doing it differently, and et cetera, et cetera. I get that, but the whole point is, without this kind of connection to fine dining, it's going to be hard for people to justify why they're spending so much on this beer. I feel like just mentally, I think it's a connection that people aren't making. People associate beer dinners, and I think they're getting better about this. I see it in Miami happening, but originally it was beer dinners and you're going out and you're getting like sliders, you're getting like, just kind of pub food.
Yeah, for sure.
And it wasn't doing anything for the image of craft beer in general. And there's a place for craft beer there too. It's great that you can get something for $2 a bottle or $6 a pint at the restaurant and pair it with wings. It's a great versatile product, but there's also a space for beers that sit in a barrel for a year and a half. It took a lot of time, a lot of effort to make, to put together, and they deserve to be paired with that really great foie gras that's being paired with wine only.
Exactly. That's where this new generation of brewers has an opportunity to do a lot of work, and it's definitely something that I'm going to focus heavily on is getting our beer into those type of places. I think that, like you said, like the possibilities and flavor and pairings with really chef-driven food and beer, especially sour and mixed fermentation beer, is something I'm really excited about.
Yeah, it's a great it's a marriage made in heaven, I think, you know, especially if you can get like a hoppy, slightly sour beer and you put that against any single wine with a spicy food, it's gonna
And
win.
I will say too that I'm not very good with that, with like realizing what the pairings need to be. I'm not good at saying, oh, this beer would be perfect with like a mint sour or something. You know, it's not it's not what my taste buds are good at. So I another thing I want to do is collaborate with chefs and with restaurants where like they can come into our barrel cellar, try some stuff, and maybe we can package something specifically for different restaurants that they're excited about making a food to pair with. You know?
Yeah, that's a cool concept. What's the beer scene like in LA right now? I know I got a lot of stuff coming up. I think Alex Noel, a friend of ours at Three Weavers, they're doing insanely well. Is the beer scene just blowing up over there? Is it
Ridiculous? 2 to 3 years ago, there were I think less than 10 breweries in LA, which is ridiculous because at that time there were I think over 100 in San Diego County. I think someone yesterday told me that there's 100 breweries in LA now. I know. That's not possibly true, but there's definitely like 30 or 40 breweries in LA now. It's booming. It's a lot of really small producers. There's a good handful of nano breweries, like under 5 barrel breweries. We also have our fair share of overly sized breweries like Iron Triangle just went in. But honestly, I think LA is going to be a hub for really good sour beer. I don't know if you've had anything from Highland Park Brewery.
I may I know the name, but I can't remember.
Bob, he's killing it with the sour beers. We have Phantom Carriage, which is a pretty new, mostly sour beer producer. There's some new guys like an hour outside of LA called Casa Agria making awesome beers. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people in LA doing sour beers, which I think is really cool. I think it can be like LA's thing, you know. And I think that there's a lot of room for LA to grow. There's a lot of I think for a long time it's been a place where there's been a overly sized amount of beer fans and beer lovers and beer traders with no local outlet. So I'm excited about it.
Sweet. And again, you could be on the forefront of that. This is really cool.
For sure.
So we've talked about where you've been, where you're going, and what you want out of the scene.
Yeah.
Is there any kind of parting words that you may have for people about your brewery? Anything that people can kind of hold on to as they wait for you to open up?
Yeah, I'll say one thing. If anyone listening or hears this is in the LA area and they want to try one of our bottles, just shoot us a message or an email or something. We'll set up a time. You can come. We'll give you some bottles. We'll give you a tour. Check it out because it's going to be so long because of how long our beers age until we're releasing beers. I'd love for people to be able to try as much as possible before then. Follow us on Instagram if you're interested. That's kind of like our main outlet for keeping people up to date. If you have any questions, if you have anything, reach out to us. We're pretty chill. So, yeah.
Sweet. That's awesome. So, yeah, look at that free beer out of this thing, So hit him up. Super nice guy on and off camera. Hit him up. The beers are great. You're not going to regret it. I've loved everything I've had so far. I've got a few other things to try that you sent me. Thank you very much for that. I guess until next time, thank you very much. And he's very accessible. So actually do it. Hit him up and go try some of these beers. You're not going to regret it. So other than that,
talk soon. Let's talk like maybe later next year or something. Catch up.
I look forward to that. I can't wait to see where you guys go from here. And it's exciting for me to watch breweries like yourself open up and get going. So cheers.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.